Welcome to your Canadiens Connection on Rocket Sports Radio. We are proud to be the trusted source for all things Habs for more than a decade. This is the Canadiens Connection Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio, keeping you informed, engaged, and entertained. My name is Michael Spinella, and I'll be your host for the next hour. This is episode 256 of the Canadiens Connection podcast, and I'm very pleased to be joined in the studio by my co-host, the editor of the Hockey News Montreal, the founder and the president of Rocket Sports, Rick Stevens. And how are you doing today, Rick?
Welcome back, sir. Good to have you back in the studio, especially. This is supposed to be a quiet August, isn't it? Instead,
yeah, not really so far.
Instead, blockbuster three-team trade that the Canadiens are involved in that we're going to be talking about today. And speaking of blockbuster, and we're going to talk about a little bit about fighting and fisticuffs and enforcers and those kinds of things. So pretty exciting show. I'm glad to have you in the chair for it.
Yeah, nice to be back here. There's a couple birthdays that we had this week, so we'll start off the show with that and then get everyone up to date on all the other Montreal Canadiens news. And then in segment two, like you said, we're going to take a bit of a deep dive here on the fighting and enforcers in the NHL. And then in segment three, it's the Have Your Say segment. Our Canadiens Connection question of the week is, do you support a ban on fighting in junior hockey? And who is the best fighter that you ever saw? We want to make sure we hear from you. And Rick, what's the best way for our listeners to reach out to us?
You can reach out to us via text. Text us anytime, 24 hours a day via the Rocket Sports text line. Easy to remember. It's 5853-ROCKET. That's 5853-ROCKET.
You can also follow at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Also, check out the website, canadiensconnection.fm. So starting the show off with two fascinating stories from this week. And we're going to send a happy birthday to Captain Nick Suzuki. He had his birthday on August the 10th. And also Caden Primo celebrated his birthday on August the 11th. Both of them have turned 24 years old.
Yeah, really nice photo on Instagram by Cole Caulfield on his Instagram Reels. A really nice photo of he and Nick Suzuki with a beautiful background, that blue-green water from when they were in Barbados, Bermuda, wherever they were in the Caribbean. It's a gorgeous photo, both with golf clubs in their hands, drivers in their hands, and he says, HBD Cap. That's his caption. Happy birthday, Captain. And yes, reminding us that they had a wonderful vacation together, and hopefully they'll have some great chemistry on the ice this season. I should say, you're talking about birthdays. I should say, in addition, it seemed like it was birthday week. Ken Dryden also celebrated a birthday. We had been talking about goaltenders in our goaltender series the last 3 weeks. Ken Dryden's name came up in that. If you missed, you want to go back and hear our goaltending series. Ken Dryden, unbelievable that he turned 76 years old this week. And you might have seen the photo on Twitter, or X as they're calling it now, of Mark Bergevin, who also had a birthday, 58 years old. And Mark was celebrating. Who was he celebrating with? There was a picture. There was a trio. It looked like in a backyard by a pool. Mark was celebrating his birthday with Dominic Ducharme and former PR director of the Canadiens, Paul Wilson. So interesting trio there.
Throw in Pierre-Luc Dubois, and then that's his trifecta of all his favorite people.
There you go.
And for our second news article to start the show, Brendan Gallagher had a nice quote saying, "I know we'll be better." And Rick, what did Brendan Gallagher say when he was talking to TSN?
Yeah, he said, you don't know what you're going to have going into a season, but I know we'll be better. And how much better is up to us individually. He said we'll be more comfortable with our system. He also said, I think Marty will be more comfortable with us. So I think for me, it was a good reminder that yes, the players, especially the young players, are all going to take strides this year. You know, Caden Gooley, Juraj Slafkovsky. But remember, Marty St. Louis is young in his coaching career, and we'll see how he takes a step forward as well. And we talked about it last summer that we expected Marty St. Louis to hit the books and be watching video all summer, and that didn't happen. But he improves by being in games, and last year was his first full season. Then there were some trials and tribulations that he experienced. We remember kind of a public one with Sean Farrell, and he voiced his opposition but lost that battle with Kent Hughes, and Sean Farrell was a good add to the lineup. So I think that Brendan Gallagher is saying this is on all of us, and we're all going to take a step forward. He went on to say that he's had a terrific summer. He had a full summer to recover. He had those. He broke his ankle twice last year, and only played 37 games. But he's had a good summer. He said he's hit all his targets, and that hopefully he's going to stay healthy for a full season this year.
So make sure you stay up to date with everything Montreal Canadiens by checking out Habs Notepad, Habs headlines, and feature articles throughout this busy offseason at thn.com/Montreal. And now it's time to talk about the big trade that we had to start the week. And this trade was a three-way trade to the Pittsburgh Penguins. It is Erik Karlsson, Rem Pitlick, Dylan Hammerlick. You might want to correct me on that one, Rick.
Go ahead.
And then, sorry?
No, go ahead.
And then there's a 2026 third round pick. And then the San Jose Sharks receive a first round draft pick from the Pittsburgh Penguins, Michael Granlund, Jan Ruda, and Mike Hoffman. And then the Montreal Canadiens receive a 2025 second round pick, as well as Jeff Petry, Casey DeSmith, and Nathan Legare. And honestly, this is a trade that I think worked out very well for all three teams. Each one of them got rid of something they didn't want. They brought in something that they kind of liked, and they have a few assets that they could potentially be flipping out. So from Montreal's perspective, you get rid of Hoffman and Pitlick that I just don't think they really had a fit in this lineup going back to the moment they arrived in town. That being said, they bring back a Jeff Petry at 25% retained. He's likely going to be out the door before the season starts. An AHL player, and Nathan Legare, he put up 19 points with Wilkes-Barre Scranton last season. A bit of a yawn from me. I think that's probably a throw-in. And then to make the goaltending situation much muddier, Casey DeSmith comes into town. And again, I think this is a player that's likely not going to join the team come training camp, but we'll wait and see what happens with that.
Yeah, a lot of pieces here, and interesting. And I think you're right that each general manager got what they wanted. San Jose was looking to move Erik Karlsson. And made that happen. And the Canadiens, yes, of course, Mike Hoffman, bad contract, and Rem Pitlick probably destined for the AHL this season, as he spent a good portion of the time there last season. So with Kent Hughes not having to retain any salary, and getting Pittsburgh to retain some of Jeff Petry's salary, that's all positive. It's just it complicates, as you said, it complicates the opening night roster even more. And one of the things that we've been talking about is the young defensemen that the Canadiens have, and their need to get in the lineup and play a lot. And Jeff Petry will complicate that situation. It might be particularly impactful on Justin Barron. And that would be unfortunate. So if Petry can be moved prior to the season, all the better. Now, but we remember that Kent Hughes is very patient. And until he gets what he wants, and we don't know what that is, it's going to be negative towards the younger players. As far as opening up spots up front, we've talked about maybe a spot for Jesse Ullinen, Emil Heineman, Raphael Harvey-Pinard. The Canadiens have way too many forwards, so moving Mike Hoffman is good. Although, was Mike Hoffman going to be in the Canadiens' top 12? Was he more likely to be the 13th or 14th forward? As I think, that's you can speculate on that. But this is and the most difficult to explain is the goaltending issue. The Canadiens now have 4 goaltenders with NHL contracts. Now this is going to give Kent Hughes options, I suppose, depending on what happens as they try to send Caden Primo down to Laval, or maybe even Casey DeSmith. There's going to be some NHL capable backup there if the Canadiens lose a goaltender or injuries crop up. Very interesting trade, very interesting timing, and I think it only yields more questions than answers right at this point.
Yeah, I guess to further along with Casey DeSmith, he's been the backup in Pittsburgh for a couple of seasons now. I don't think that he necessarily has starter potential, but at his best, he's kind of an average type goaltender. He can do a backup job, sometimes step up and take the wheels for a little bit, but he showed a lot of inconsistency last year with the injury to Tristan Jarry in Pittsburgh. So I don't think that he's necessarily a goalie of the future, and I personally would expect him to be gone by the time training camp happens, but you can't confirm. And like you said, Kent Hughes is somebody that likes to get what he wants, so I get the feeling he'll be quite patient with that.
Now, for the optimists and for those who put a lot of stock in the way Sam Montembeault played at the World Championships, Casey DeSmith was very good at the World Championships for the U.S. team. With respect to either of them, either Sam or Casey, I don't think there was a lot of talent at that particular championship, so I wouldn't put a lot of stock. I wouldn't put a lot of faith in their stock being raised for either of them, actually, from that tournament anyway.
And after the trade, we got to hear from Mike Hoffman on his time spent here in Montreal.
Yeah, really, and enjoyed my time there. A great group of guys, like the coaching staff and whatnot. But I don't think I, really played up to what I'm capable of doing. Still really believe in myself and my game, and think that I can contribute and have a lot to bring. So hopefully we can prove that in San Jose.
Well, he sounds kind of regretful about his time in Montreal, that he enjoyed his time, he enjoyed his teammates, and no problem with the coaching staff, but just didn't work out. Just didn't work out for whatever reason. I think he was brought by Marc Bergevin to the Canadiens to help with the power play. That never happened. Now, I wouldn't lay that at the feet of Mike Hoffman. The power play has been dreadful, partly because of mostly I would say because of the system they've been playing, and Burroughs has got to take responsibility for that. So whether he can resurrect his career in San Jose, we wish him well, and he sounds like he has a positive attitude going into it.
And kind of funny, too, that Hoffman ends up in San Jose. Not the first time he's been traded to San Jose, although the last time it was maybe like an hour or two, and what ended up being kind of a fleecing of Ottawa being caught with their pants down. And Florida essentially called up San Jose saying, all right, if you can trade for Hoffman, we'll give you a collection of draft picks. And that's what happened. The San Jose Sharks sent a bunch of scraps to Ottawa to get Hoffman, and then flipped him out for a much better return. So I think his time in San Jose will be a little bit longer than just a few hours this time around. And from San Jose's perspective, I would expect that this is a piece they try to use to generate some offense in the early parts of the season, maybe resurrect his career, like you said, and flip him out again at the deadline.
Yeah, and that's fine. Rem Pitlick, we learned afterwards, had asked for a trade out of Montreal. He wasn't happy that he had spent half the season last year, although it was deserved that he spent some time in Laval. He wasn't contributing offensively, and of course, we know that he had been labeled as the worst player defensively the year prior. So he'll move on to Pittsburgh, and good luck to him as well. The Pitlicks in the Montreal organization are dwindling down to one now. So good luck to Rem.
And I think one final note that I wanted to point out in regard to this trade is Jeff Petry, I believe, has a 10-team no-trade list. Montreal, I guess, was not on that list, which is why he ended up back here. So he might be a little bit surprised. And based on the fact that the last time he was in Montreal, it seemed like he was wanting out for quite some time. I don't expect that he'll be here for very, very long, right?
So just to add to that, it's a 15-team no-trade list that Petry has. It's a little bit more restrictive, and it's a list that's reviewed every July 1st. So he would have had to have recently updated it. And important to say that, Montreal wasn't part of that. So he was willing to come to Montreal. I think it's been exaggerated a little bit about the circumstances that led Jeff Petry out of Montreal. Did he ask for a trade out? Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. And good on Kent Hughes for accommodating him. But as far as being disenchanted with Montreal, I don't think it was any of that. He and his family and his wife Julie were concerned about the COVID regulations, the restrictions on travel, being separated from family. They have 4 boys, and there were some health issues at the time. Julie complained about the health care available in Quebec, and she's not alone in that, and wanted support and help from the extended family to be able to look after the other kids when she had to get medical attention. So they wanted to be closer to their family. They moved back to Michigan, and then that meant that Jeff was in Montreal, and the rest of his family was apart, and that made the situation difficult. So I think they enjoyed their time in Montreal, and was open and willing to come back. Just another little tidbit, and I thought it was interesting that Kyle Dubas said that he did not reach out to Petry about his no-trade list. That means that Montreal was not on that list, and he asked Petry to waive. So I still think the Petrys were open to coming back. The fact that the Penguins have withheld 25% of the salary, and now the Canadiens can take 50% on if they trade him. That number has dropped from $6.25 million all the way down to 2.35, and so that makes Jeff Petry far more marketable. Who would be interested? Well, Chris Johnston has said that Dallas has been very interested and maybe more interested at this point. He's 35 years old, has 2 years on his contract, so that's a little bit difficult. I think, as you said, we got to keep an eye on Casey DeSmith. What's going to happen there? His situation is going to be difficult. $1.8 million is probably pretty high for what he brings to the team. And we remember in our goalie series, Marty Biron said the goaltenders market this summer is fully saturated. We saw Connor Hellebuck maybe wanting to move. There was no opportunity to move him. We saw some goaltenders retire because they weren't able to find contracts. So that's going to maybe a tougher trade for Kent Hughes to make. I guess why are we talking about trades so much for Petry and Casey DeSmith? Well, the fact that it's been a week now and there's been complete radio silence from the Canadiens. Kent Hughes hasn't spoken about the trade. The principals, DeSmith and Petry, haven't spoken. I think that says that gives a good indication that they may not be around, very long. But that's something that we'll have to wait with bated breath to see what happens.
And we also got to hear some of the reactions from the Montreal players about this trade. What happened with that, Rick?
Well, there was a Pro-Am event for Patrice Bergeron, and some of the Canadiens, Montreal Canadiens, were there. Sam Montembeault was one, and we just said radio silence from the Canadiens with respect to Jeff Petry, respect to Casey DeSmith. But Kent Hughes, right after the trade was announced, reached out to Sam Montembeault's agent. Seem odd? Maybe a little. And Sam says, Kent was, quotes, Kent was super nice. Almost as soon as the trade was over, he spoke with my agent telling him not to worry. It's great that he took the time to do that. And then he went on to say that he's met Casey DeSmith before at a BioSteel event, and they know each other a little bit. So I thought that was interesting that Kent Hughes wanted to reassure Sam Montembeault. We didn't hear the same thing from Jake Allen. And also at this event, David Savard, Caden Gooley, and David Savard knows how to answer these things. He said, we're all in the same boat. We don't know if there's something else that will happen from the exchange. Players are smart too. They know that there's a possibility of Jeff Petry moving on. And Caden Gooley said that he was a little more forthcoming. He said, I really didn't expect it, but I'm happy to see Jeff again. But who knows what will happen next? I try not to think about it. He is a member of the Montreal Canadiens at the moment. Fascinating, I thought, reaction from the Canadiens players. And the only one who really spoke about this at any length was Nathan Legarrette, and he was glad to be interviewed by the French media, and he was very excited to come to Montreal. If you don't know about this player, you want to listen to the Press Zone podcast that happened earlier this week, where Amy and Patrick Williams spent a lot of time talking about the ramifications. Short story is, he came from junior with a great deal of promise. He's not lived up to that promise. We know that the Pittsburgh Penguins are ranked 29th by The Athletic in terms of prospect pools, and Nathan Legarrette is number 15 in terms of Penguins prospects. So I think the ship has sailed on him. Just because skating isn't there, he processes the game slowly, and he'll be in Laval, probably a bottom six player like he was in Wilkes-Barre. So, but that's the reaction from no reaction necessarily from the principals, but reaction from the players, and we thought we'd pass it on to you.
Absolutely. And speaking of a player that's likely to be in the AHL, there were some transactions that happened in Laval and Trois-Rivières. So now I think is a good time to get to our Habs prospect report.
It's time for the Rocket Report. The Rocket Sports Media Team is your premier source for information about the Laval Rocket, the AHL affiliate of the Montreal Canadiens, as well as Habs prospects playing in the CHL, NCAA, and leagues around the world. Bookmark thn.com/Montreal to follow our comprehensive coverage of Canadiens prospects.
So Joel Teasdale, who's played 3 seasons here in Laval, has moved on. He signed a 1-year, one-way AHL contract with the Iowa Wild.
Joel Teasdale made his NHL debut at the end of the season last year for the Canadiens. I thought he had a good season in Laval, played 58 games, collected 38 points. But I think the writing was on the wall that, not necessarily an NHL prospect. Foot speed really slow. He's slow in the AHL. But he's effective when he parks in front of the net, and he's big body, screens the goaltender and goes after rebounds. So he was waiting on an NHL contract. That didn't transpire. Instead, will stay in the AHL and play for the Iowa Wild, and we're supportive of him and wish him well in Iowa.
Last week, we reported that the Laval Rockets signed Nolan Yaremko to a 1-year contract. He played 12 games with Laval last season, but he spent the bulk of the season playing with Mount Royal University.
I'm very excited. This being my first pro contract, and I'm lucky enough to get a little bit of a look there at the end of last season with Laval, and I'm just happy everything worked out. I really enjoyed all the people there, the teammates, all the staff, the fans. It was I would just call it an electric place to play hockey, and I'm just super happy at the end of the day. It worked out where I can come back.
Nolan Yaremko, very excited. As you said, played a lot with U Sports, got a chance to play with Laval, and talks about that electric atmosphere in Laval. We're going to be paying even more attention. I think fans will be paying more attention to Laval. I've been there. Our whole team's been there. You've been there. You know what it's like to play, to see a game at Place Bell, and hearing Nolan talk about that electric feeling in the rink is, you can't wait for it to start.
Yeah, absolutely. He was an interesting player to watch in the brief stint that he did have. But Rick, do you expect him to spend the majority of the time with Laval, or do you think he'll end up spending some time in the CHL as well? Yeah,
he's on a two-way deal, so I expect him to spend most of the time with Trois-Rivières. But who can predict these things? And particularly with so much movement in the AHL, it's nice to have a player who's familiar with the atmosphere and who's energized by it rather than being afraid of it.
And on the note of Trois-Rivières, the Trois-Rivières Lions signed forward Justin Ducharme. He spent his first pro season with the Lions. Then he went off to play with Idaho, and he's going to be back this season. So he's a very familiar face within that organization. Yeah, he's also, as you said, took a year off, played elsewhere, but is excited to be back within the Montreal organization, and you'll find him in Trois-Rivières for most of the season. Taking a look at the CHL, OHL Commissioner David Branch announced his intention to retire at the end of the 2023-24 season. He was serving as the commissioner of the OHL since September 15th, 1979, and served as the president of the CHL from 1996 to 2019.
This is a foundational piece. The OHL is the premier junior hockey league in the world. They produce top quality prospects year after year after year. I'd like to say that it was the Q. It's not, and we know that the Q had. I think it was Stéphane Leroux who said that it was a disastrous year in the draft this past year, with 12, I believe, members of the Q drafted. There's the Q, there's the WHL, but the OHL is the Premier League, and by and large, a lot of that comes from David Branch and his leadership over 45 years. This is his 45th year as commissioner, and it's going to be interesting to see who can fill those shoes. Well, no one can fill those shoes, but who is tapped to fill those shoes, to try and fill those shoes, and if this will lead to change in some of the rules that we're going to be talking about today.
Possibly following suit with a rule change that came in the queue. The QMJHL will officially ban fighting in the 2023-24 season. We'll get into this more in the second segment when we talk about fights within the NHL and hockey. This was a pretty big inspiration for that topic, actually, and we reported about this a little bit leading up to this ban. There were some things in the news floating around that this was likely going to happen. So it's officially announced. And Rick, there's a lot of different ways we can look at this.
For sure. This is something we talked about in March. It was something initiated by the Quebec government and demanded the Minister of Sport basically said, you act or I will, to remove fighting from the game. So this was signaled back in March. They said that it would have to go to their Board of Governors in June. It did. It was given approval, and since they've drafted official rules, and it was announced in full along with the rules this past week. So as you said, we'll get into this a little bit more in our second segment.
Looking at the NCAA, Boston University announced that Jack Gordon will join their team. He sounds like someone that has a very familiar last name, doesn't he?
He does. Jack Gordon, son of Jeff Gordon, and going to BU, the BU Terriers. That's interesting all in itself. I would say we know Lane Hudson is there. We know that I always get the wrong Tuck, but one of the Tucks is there. It's Luke Tuck who is there, of course, and Lane Hudson's brother is there as well. But really interesting is that Jack Hughes is also there. And Jack Hughes moved from Northeastern, where he had spent 2 years, to the BU Terriers a week ago. Not that Jack Hughes, not that Jack Hughes, but Kent Hughes' son, Jack Hughes, moved to BU. And then a week later, Jeff Gordon's son is there too. So this is going to be a team in addition to the Canadiens prospects being there, this is going to be a team for us to watch this coming season.
Should I start calling them the Boston University Canadiens? Would that make people angry? But yeah, interesting note, and we'll definitely keep an eye on this within our prospect report, I'm sure. And last note here within our prospect report, a few podcasts ago, we mentioned that the Canadiens were on the NHL Network, NHL Network's best prospects list. They put together a top 50. And, we're taking a look at the full list as that was released. We see David Reinbacher comes in at number 17, and we see Lane Hudson come in at number 26. But within that top 10, the top 5 are Connor Bedard, Adam Fantilli, Leo Carlson, Matt Michkov, and Luke Hughes. So, Rick, seeing how far back some of these Montreal Canadiens prospects are ranked, I imagine fans aren't too happy about that, eh?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some discussion about this. The NHL Network is, their results. Some Canadians may say, well, who cares? However, this was put together with the help of Sam Cosentino, who we know quite well and who's very good at this, works with Sportsnet, has been on our podcast a number of times. And when we played that clip from Sam a couple of weeks ago, episode 254, where he talked specifically about Reinbacher and Lane Hudson, we knew the rankings, 17 for Reinbacher, as you said, and 26 for Hudson, but we didn't know who else was there. And now that the full list has been released this week, it's tough for Canadians, especially seeing Michkov at number 4. Logan Cooley from last year's draft, who we were pretty high on, is number 6. Nemec and Juracek, we talked about, what if the Canadiens took a defenseman instead of Slavkovsky that year? In the top 10 at 7 and 8. Will Smith rounds out the top 10. And Ryan Leonard, Zach Benson in the top 20. We've talked about them a lot. And only those 2 prospects, Reinbacher and Hudson. And we should say Juraj Slavkovsky not eligible given he spent his season with Montreal in the NHL. So you had to have fewer than 25 NHL games to qualify for this list as a prospect. This is going to add fuel to the folks who are upset about Michkov. Now it's time for Reinbacher to prove all the doubters wrong.
Absolutely. And you can find all our content about Canadiens prospects at thn.com/Montreal. We have a quote for this week. This one comes in from Captain Nick Suzuki, the birthday boy, and it relates again to what's coming up in our second segment as we talk about fights. Nick Suzuki talks about fights and enforcers within the NHL.
And I'll just add, before we hear the clip, this clip is from March of this year. And this is, he was asked about fighting in the Q and fighting in general in the NHL back in March when the Q was signaling that was the direction they were moving on to remove fighting from their game.
I never fought, but obviously I got hit a few times and guys stood up for me, and I think it almost is a big part of the game. There's just that intimidation factor. You can't just be running around doing whatever you want. There's some consequences that happens between the players, and I don't know if it's a great thing for the game. I don't know if it's a tryout or it could come back, who knows. So but I don't think it should be taken away, even though I'm not a fighter. But I like when guys step up for each other. It shows that you're taking care of your buddy and stuff like that. So we'll see how the Q does, but I think fighting's definitely a part of the game.
Interesting the way he finishes that. Fighting is definitely part of the game, and that's coming from a player. He acknowledges he hasn't fought, but he appreciates that he knows that if someone takes liberties with him or one of his teammates, that there's going to be, his word, consequences, and that there's even a intimidation factor that might curb some of that bad behavior. He's hoping that this is a trial by the Q. I don't think it is, but he said it should definitely not be taken away in the NHL, and I think that's fascinating and kind of sets the stage for our discussion in the second segment.
Yeah, absolutely. Hearing from a player that, like we said, he's never been in a fight, getting his opinion on it and where his stance is, I appreciate hearing that as we lead up to that second segment. But before we get there, we do have some hockey news and notes from around the league. Arizona Coyotes are looking to purchase some land in Mesa, Arizona. Mesa, Arizona has a population of about 500,000. They released a huge press release about this, and it's basically saying that they're intending to purchase some land.
I didn't see anything on the NHL.com site, only on the Coyote site and on news sites, of course. So now maybe that'll be different when they actually follow through and make the purchase. I thought that might be a bit telling.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Buffalo Sabres hired former Canadiens defenseman Zach Redmond as a development coach. Redmond is currently 35. He spent the last 3 seasons of his hockey career playing in Germany. But Rick, I think this is somebody that you like quite a bit. I do. Zach Redmond was great for. He only played, I think, 16 games for the Montreal Canadiens. But he provided that veteran presence in St. John's and was really good with the young defensemen. Super smart.
and a teacher on the bench kind of thing. I had the opportunity many times to talk to him. Really a student of the game, knows the game inside and out, knows his position inside and out, and even better, he's able to communicate really well to fellow players or younger players. I think he's a perfect ad for Buffalo, and really nice. Congratulations to Zach on the new position.
Yeah, big congratulations to him on finding a career in hockey after he retired from his professional career, and really good on him. Excited to see what he's able to do with that young Buffalo defense corps.
And he got to Buffalo when he was traded from the Montreal Canadiens. He was traded from the Canadiens to Buffalo for Nicolas Deslauriers, which maybe leads nicely into what we're going to be talking about in the second segment.
Absolutely. That second segment, as we said a few times, it's going to be all about fights in the NHL and enforcers. So make sure you stick around for that. First, we'll take our first break on the Canadiens Connection podcast. We'll hear from DraftKings, and then we'll get to that big topic. So stay with us. This is the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio.
New customers, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. Bet just $5 to score $150 in bonus bets instantly. That's code THPN only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Massachusetts, call 800-327-5050 or visit gamblinghelplinema.org. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Kansas, call 1-800-522-4700 on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, KS. In West Virginia, gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. All games regulated by the West Virginia Lottery. Please play responsibly. In partnership with Hollywood Casinos at Charlestown Races. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 21 and over in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details and state-specific responsible gambling resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. 1 boost per eligible game. Opt-in required. Max bet $50. 10-plus leg requisite for 100% boost. Eligibility, wagering, and deposit restrictions apply. Terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/baseball terms.
Welcome back to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio. I'm Michael Spinella. You can find me on Twitter at The Spinella. With me in the studio is our president and founder of Rocket Sports, Rick Stevens. Make sure to give him a follow on Twitter at Rocket Sports. You can also follow at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Plus, check out the website canadiensconnection.fm. Just a reminder here to make sure you subscribe to the Canadiens Connection podcast in the player or on your favorite podcasting app. That way you never miss a single episode. And it's Enforcers Week at the Hockey News with a focus on the best fighters of each of the 32 franchises in the NHL. And this comes the same week, very coincidentally, as the QMJHL's ban on fighting in their league. So we're going to take a deep dive into fighting in the NHL. Does it still have a place? Is it on its way out? What's going on? Everything we can do. We came up with all the different angles. And Rick, I'm pretty excited to get a deep dive in this one. I think to set expectations, I don't know that this is a yes or no question, is it?
This is a really complicated issue. And I think there are, of course, there's going to be fans out there that says who maybe agree with Nick Suzuki and say fighting is absolutely part of the game, and we should just leave it alone. There are probably fans who say it's archaic. It shouldn't have any place in any sport. And I think there's a lot of fans in the middle. And I think it's more of a nuanced view that and maybe even views have changed over time, because the game and the impact of fighting has certainly changed over time. And I think we're going to try to attack it from all angles here.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start things off, what is the state of fighting within the current game? Looks like the number of fights are currently on their way down. If you look at the amount of fights per season between 2010 and 2019, fights have dropped down about 65%. So that's pretty significant. But Rick, it seems like fighting still does happen within the game, and it seems to have a huge impact on how things go along, doesn't it?
Yeah, if you look at even broader over 20 years, the early 2000s, we were seeing fights in 0.5, an average fight per game of 0.5, which is saying that watch 2 games and you're going to see a fight. Now, as it's progressed, it's probably you're going to have to watch 6 games thereabouts before you'll see a fight on average. It's really come down significantly in the last 2 decades, and you're not seeing. I think part of it is is there an acceptance as the game broadens to non-traditional markets, and fans, sports fans in general, not used to seeing fighting in a game. What's their tolerance level? And lots of people bring that up, but I think it really went on the decline once the salary cap was introduced, and the salary cap means that you're going to have to be really efficient with your dollars, especially those players who play at the bottom of the lineup, maybe on the 4th line, and that's where you'd find the one-dimensional fighters, enforcers in the past. And teams, I don't know, that serial fighter position, that one-dimensional fighter who doesn't contribute in any other way, who plays 5 minutes and is just there mostly on the bench as an intimidation factor. In the salary cap era, that just doesn't exist anymore for the most part. So I think it that might not have been predicted, but the salary cap has had a real impact on reducing fighting in the NHL.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting point that you bring up as well. Although I will say it does seem like teams still have some value in bringing in players that can fight. I think both Kachuk brothers in this instance are kind of unicorns in the fact that they can put up a ton of points and they can stick up for themselves and be very physical and fight. I don't think there's a ton of that happening between them, and I guess outside of that, I guess Tom Wilson's the only other name that comes to mind. But you're still seeing Ryan Reeves get a 3-year contract with Toronto, and Ryan Reeves maybe at one point was more of a useful player, but at this point, I don't know that he brings a whole lot outside of his intimidation factor, no?
Yeah, he has to be really, really good at that role, that intimidation role, to stick. He can play hockey, and you look, don't look too much farther than the Montreal Canadiens and the resident tough guys. Arber Xhekaj, Michael Pezzetta. Michael Pezzetta, he can skate, he can forecheck. He's can be used on the penalty kill. He has to do more than just fight. And Arber Xhekaj, his toughness is appreciated by his teammates for sure, but he also has to be able to play defense. And I think we're seeing a move to that where a player has to contribute in other ways rather than fighting. And yes, there's going to be some holdovers, but I think those are slowly being phased out.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we wanted to do here is look at the types of fights and the reasons why certain fights do happen within the NHL. And to start, momentum shift. It seems, at least from the eye test, that whenever a fight happens, you can see a drastic change in the momentum. Sometimes, you see that's very quickly followed by a goal for the team that was a little bit behind. You see when you're watching any NHL game and there's a fight with one team very far in the lead, you start to hear the commentators talk, okay, well, maybe it wasn't so smart of the guy on the winning team to get into a fight, because now all of a sudden the team that was losing, it looks like they're running around the ice and having their way now. But looking at some stats, it does seem like 76% of the time, a lot of fights are followed by a goal within the next few minutes. That being said, that stat has been disputed quite a bit, and saying that, well, there's a lot of other things that can contribute to momentum. Things like just a big hit, a penalty kill, a power play, a timeout, even just a change of the period. So, Rick, I'll get you to weigh in your thoughts on how fighting impacts momentum.
Yeah, this one's really tough to establish a direct correlation because it's in your mind. If there's a fight and a short time later there's a goal, that's confirmation bias, and you're going to remember that. If a goal doesn't happen, you're going to forget about it. You're not going to balance the two and say, well, I remember that. No, that's not going to happen. It's going to be it's going to be reinforced in your mind, especially if you have that view that fighting is, helps with momentum. So I don't know where it seems, as you said, the eye test, it seems to confirm itself, but I don't think we can use that as necessary a reason to keep fighting, because as you said, the game is complicated. The game is fast. The game is always changing. So it's difficult to filter for all of the other factors that may have happened.
Yeah, not quite as simple as when you boot up NHL on the PS5 and you see immediately after a fight all your team gains energy. Fortunately, it's not quite as simple, and I don't think there's really a stat that you can pull up to prove or disprove anything here. So that's why along the way we will reiterate that I don't think that it's a clear yes or no, fighting good, fighting bad type argument that we're having. We're just going to have to present what we have based on eye test and statistics. Another reason why fighting seems to happen, and this is actually kind of divvied up into three different points here, but they're all kind of along the same lines. So standing up for a teammate, protecting a star player, or deterring for violence. So I think that, again, with the eye test, you see quite often it happens where say a Tom Wilson or whatnot is running around on the ice, having his lay of the land, maybe taking some liberties with some star players. Someone on your team goes and steps up, gets into the fight, takes Tom Wilson out of the game. Does that really help? So when Tom Wilson comes back, did that fight really deter him from going around and continuing to have his lay of the land? Did standing up for your teammate really end up changing what this player will do going forward? That's another one where I think it's very hard to say. I was reading an article on Forbes, and they're pretty much saying that, well, there doesn't really seem to be any real evidence of fighting or the threat of fighting has deterred any violent play in the NHL, despite what other people might think. Rick, I'll get you to start weighing in on this as well. Yeah,
I saw that Forbes article, and Gary Bettman has come out and said the fact that we have fighting in our game reduces violence. So the Forbes people said, all right, let's look at only the games where there's been a fight, and are there fewer penalties on average in that game? And no, that once there's a fight, there's usually scuffles, and there's some roughing penalties, and there's not necessarily fewer penalties, but is there less violence, and is there less vicious attacks on star players? That's what I think people like Gary Bettman are getting at, that's the kind of violence that's reduced by having the intimidation factor. And the fact that the Forbes folks didn't look at games where no fights happen, that could be because there was a fighter or two in the lineup. Again, it's kind of, trying to lead themselves to a conclusion that agrees with their hypothesis, and I don't know that it's as simple as that. Again, these folks who, like Forbes, who try to understand hockey when they don't have a basic understanding of the game, and make conclusions is I think it's more complicated than that.
So the question that I want to ask here is, okay, so you're the Montreal Canadiens. You have a game against Toronto. You know Ryan Reeves is playing. You want to dress Michael Pezzetta and Arbor Xhekaj, right? Just for that intimidation factor and the threat of a fight coming up. I don't think that it's really any other question along the way. I don't see a scenario in which you don't dress either of those players when you know you're coming up against a Ryan Reeves, right?
Right. And we saw when Reeves was with the Rangers and Pezzetta went out, was pestering him the whole game. And after the game, Reeves was quoted as saying, "I don't even know who this guy is. Who is he? Why is he on me? I don't know. I don't want to fight him. You're a nobody." But the fact that Michael Pezzetta was willing to engage, and yeah, he didn't do well. He got ragged out, but he took Ryan Reeves off the ice for 5 minutes, at the very least. Sent a signal that he wasn't going to be able to ride roughshod over the Canadiens, and took him off the ice. Maybe there's some value in that.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point, and something I wanted to get at a little bit too, is that when you take a fighting penalty, you're getting a guy off the ice for at least 5 minutes. Sometimes there's a misconduct in there as well, so you're getting a guy off for, say, 15 minutes. So let's say, let's go back to this Tom Wilson example that I keep going back to. He's taking some liberties. Okay, so one of Xhekaj or Pezzetta steps up, they fight, and let's say, there's 5 minutes left in the second. Okay, there's a potential now that you're not seeing Tom Wilson again until there's 10 minutes left in the third period. So I think fighting can be kind of strategic in that way, no?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And it's someone is going to say, well, if fighting was banned, then Reeves wouldn't be in the game, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. But there are players who can play, who are mean and vicious, and could have an impact on your star players, and they need to be dealt with.
Absolutely, and sometimes maybe it's not necessarily the fight that's causing an issue. It's, them going after, say, a Cole Caulfield, laying out maybe some questionable hits that aren't getting called, maybe scrumming a little bit after the whistle, targeting a smaller guy like a Cole Caulfield. I think the threat of fighting or an actual fight coming from this, at times, at least, again, back to my eye test, it seems like a lot of those players just kind of, they'll go into the background a little bit after they know that there's that threat there. So I think, what are your thoughts on the deterrent factor anyway? Yeah.
Again, the other side of the coin is, well, if fighting wasn't in the game, then those kind of attacks on the scoring players, the top talent, the skilled players, will be handled by the referees, and I think we've seen, and even the off ice officials, both the on ice and off ice officials haven't handled things responsibly or to a degree that is going to appease the fans, because we've seen suspensions inadequate, we've seen penalties inadequate, and there's going to be a strong pushback from fans that say, the guys on the ice have to settle this.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. And kind of the last point there in standing up for your teammates. So you see someone gets injured by one of the other team's tough guys. Immediately a fight breaks out. I think that also kind of feels good for the player that got hurt and some of the other guys on the bench, that, we have a big, tough instigator on our team that's willing to stand up for us when, the other team's maybe having their lay of the land too much. I think that's a little bit of extra confidence that makes some of these smaller players feel a little bit taller, no?
Well, don't take our word for it. Listen to Nick Suzuki. He couldn't have been clearer of how he feels about having that kind of player in the lineup protecting him.
Absolutely. So the next type of fight that we seem to see quite often is a fight after a big clean hit. This is something that I know has come up in the general manager meetings. I don't know that it's really led anywhere. But Rick, what can you tell us about the fighting after a clean hit?
Well, I think, me personally, if the NHL wants to crack down somewhere, here's a great area. And you're right, they've talked about it at the GM meetings. Not much has come out of it. I think they're afraid to make a judgment on what's clean and what's not, and all of that. But the officials on the ice should know that kind of situation. It's pretty obvious. And Alex Romanoff was a prime example. He'd deliver a thunderous clean hit. And then be forced to fight afterwards, which is silly. That's you want to keep the physicality in the game. So don't penalize the guys who can play that way. If you want to reduce the fighting, go after players who initiate a fight after a clean hit. And yes, there's an instigator rule, but it's very rarely used as I've seen.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. And the instigator penalty, I think it's something that could be useful. But again, even when it does happen, it seems like it never really ends up being used correctly. And it can be quite inconsistent. I think that's fair to say, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the final type of fight is the stage fight, the fights that are to do with the code. And I think you and I kind of agree that this is our least favorite kind of fight. The stage one seems to happen between two tough guys, two enforcers. It's talked about previously. Sometimes you can even see the clips of, two tough guys talking during the warm-up. Okay, when are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? And then there you go, opening face-off. It happens right away. We were all expecting it. And then there's this code, and I'm not going to lie, calling it the code to me sounds a little bit cheesy. But Rick, I'll get you to start weighing in on this one too. Fortunately,
this is something that has mostly disappeared from the game. It was very common in, say, the late 2000s. Well, for a long time, up until maybe the late 2000s. And I think of when I think of a staged fight, the picture in my mind is Georges Laraque. And Georges Laraque was, when he was with Edmonton, he was a fierce fighter and an enforcer to be feared. And I think it was the Hockey News back in 2003 that labeled him the best fighter in the league. When he came to the Montreal Canadiens, all of that disappeared. And we talked about and Nick Suzuki talked about one of the important reasons to have that kind of guy in your lineup is to step in and stand up for a teammate. Unfortunately, Georges Laraque, by the time his career was winding down, he didn't do any of that. He never stepped in for a teammate because George had this. By the time he got to the Canadiens, George had this code. And his quote from after a game where players were getting absolutely demolished on the ice. And I remember it was the Arizona Coyotes, and it was Kurt Sauer. It was a big guy, just absolutely crushed Andre Kostitsyn. It wasn't legal. It wasn't a good hit. It was a double forearm smash to the Kostitsyn, to the head of Kostitsyn. And you can say, well, I didn't like Kostitsyn anyway, but that's not the point here. This was a really dirty hit, awful hit. Kostitsyn went on to miss a couple of games after that. And George Laraque's there on the bench. Kurt Sauer was enormous, 6'4", 220. And George said, well, George was asked after the game, why didn't you get into it? It's my code. The code is from heavyweight to heavyweight, not from lightweight to whatever Sauer is to heavyweight. He's not forced to go with a guy like me. You respect a guy who backs up his actions if something like that happens, but at the same time, you can't blame a guy if he doesn't want to answer the bell to me. So what happened in that game? It was Tom Kostopoulos, and people, the heart of Tom Kostopoulos, if it could have been inserted in George Laraque, he was the one who stepped in, and he got absolutely pummeled because he was a small guy, but he had heart. And unfortunately, George was only interested in that point at these stage fights. You tap the guy on the shoulder, you talk to him during a face-off, as you said, and you toss a few, you go through the motions, you pat the guy on in the pants, and you both go to the penalty box, and you've done your job for the game. Well, that is garbage to me. That has to be out of the game. And fortunately, because I think of the salary cap, those one-dimensional fighters who would sit on the bench and just get out there for the stage fights are mostly gone. But and absolutely good riddance.
Yeah, definitely. Hearing that it is pretty unfortunate because when a play like what happens to Kostitsyn happens, I think it's expected that somebody, no matter what, has to step up and answer the bell. I think if a play like that happens and there's no fight, everyone's talking, okay, well, where's the fight? And that's kind of why everyone turns to George Laraque and thinks, okay, well, why isn't this happening, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, remember when Sam Montembeault got run and Jeff Petry was standing there looking around. Jeff Petry's not a fighter, but he's not a small player either. You expect somebody to respond when one of your players is attacked.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think moving along in our topic here, the next thing we wanted to get into, penalties, misconducts, suspensions, just the rules that surround fighting within the NHL. And I think to start giving a little bit of an overview of what the rule is a hockey fight occurs if a player gets in a dispute during the hockey game. They are allowed to drop their gloves and fight. When this occurs, the gameplay will be stopped by a whistle by the referees. The fight is allowed to go until the player hits the ice or the referee deems it's time to stop. An instigator will be given to the player who throws the first punch or uses verbal language to provoke another player or the first player to drop the gloves. Again, we've talked about how this can be sometimes a little bit inconsistent. Fighting majors, 5 minutes. Sometimes you will be given a 10-minute misconduct on top of that. And Rick, what else can you do to add to the rules that surround hockey and fighting? Yeah,
they've tweaked the rules a little bit. There's rules about fights in the last 5 minutes of the game, and to curb all of that. There's rules about more recently about helmets. There's rules about keeping your sweater on and elbow pads and tie downs and all that sort of thing. The NHL has basically, like I said, tweaked the rules, and they haven't changed all that much in any substantive way to affect the drop that we've seen. In my opinion, they haven't really affected the significant drop that we've seen in fighting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, who are the best players that we consider fighters on the Canadiens and around the NHL? I think we've brought up their names a couple times already, but on the Canadiens, I think right now you start to think of Arber Xhekaj and Michael Pezzetta as the two guys who would be the enforcers, the guys that will answer the bell. And then around the league, you have your Nick Deloriers, who we talked about, Tom Wilson, Ryan Reeves. I think both of the Kachucks kind of end up in that category as well. Looking at the Atlantic Division, there are a lot of heavyweights. Like I said, Reeves in Toronto, Boko Amama, Zach McEwen in Ottawa. Pizzetta, Xhekaj in Montreal, Tkachuk, and many others on the Florida Panthers, Jeannot and Bogosian in Tampa, along with a few others as well. And I don't think the list just ends there, but certainly seems like we still have a lot of those players that are quite large and can answer the bell when it comes to a fight.
It surprised me a little when looking into this issue as part of the NHL the Enforcers Week with the Hockey News, that the Canadiens, they really held their own in this category. They were 7th in the league in 2022-23 with 29 fighting majors, and 18 of those, you mentioned them, Arbor Xhekaj and Michael Pizzetta had 9 each. And that places both of those players in the top 10 in fighters in terms of frequency anyway, for the National Hockey League last year. So that's a bit of a surprise, I think, that the Canadiens have that much of a tough reputation. As you said, Nicolas Deslauriers, former Canadian, now with Philly, that kind of fits their fan base to have a tough guy leading the league in terms of 14 fights last year.
Absolutely. And on the Canadiens in general, I guess going back as they have had a pretty long history, are there any favorite fighters that you had in mind? Not to get too off topic, but...
No, and I think that I'll encourage folks to head to thn.com/Montreal to look at the I've ranked the top 5 fighters of all time with the Montreal Canadiens. And you know, it's a pretty long list that I had to choose from. The Canadiens have had some pretty tough players in their lineup, not necessarily enforcers, and that was the focus of the Hockey News this week. But you think of players who weren't necessarily enforcers, like a Sheldon Surrey, a Terry Harper, Larry Robinson, Peter Mahovlich, who could really take care of themselves and their teammates, Pierre Bouchard, Mario Tremblay, Doug Riseborough, Mario Turner Stevenson, Brendan Gallagher. These are tough players who we know that other teams can't take liberties when they're on the ice because they're going to get involved. And Maurice Richard, the Rocket, as well, was a pretty tough customer. So I'll encourage you to head to the Hockey News to take a look at how the Canadiens all time, the top 5 fighters, the top 5 enforcers, and we want to hear from you. You agree? You disagree? We still want to hear from you. You can text us at 585-3-ROCKET.
Absolutely, and it is a great read, so definitely check that out if you haven't already. But at this point in the conversation, I do think it's time to look at things maybe from the other side, perhaps a little bit of a darker side, and that's when it comes to repetitive head injuries and its effect with the CTE. Now, Gary Bettman has come out a number of times saying that he doesn't believe that there's any link between fighting and CTE, but a lot of studies are coming out saying that there is a very direct link. And Rick, this is going to be, I think, the more difficult end of the conversation. I know that we're both not experts on this particularly, but what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, we talked about this a couple months back on the show about the established link, and the research, I think, is pretty clear that repetitive head trauma leads to CTE. It's something that other leagues, particularly the National Football League, has taken a lead role in. Gary Bettman has denied that there's any link, and he's in fact said that only 2% of fights result in a concussion. Now, we don't have any. The NHL doesn't provide that data to know whether that's true or not true, and maybe Gary's kind of in a legal bubble that he's not willing to admit liability at this point. But this is a serious issue. It's a serious issue for NHL players, and it's a serious issue for younger players in that. And so there's certainly some understanding that you want to limit the exposure to your players, your product from being exposed to that.
Yeah, and it is a contact sport. It is very physical. A lot of the hits are although they are entertaining, you do see players get injured. And obviously, we've talked about fighting's role within the game, but I think you can't talk too much about that without considering the effects that it does have long term. So that's why we want to make sure that we brought that up within our discussion too.
That's right.
So fighting bans, we did see that the Q announced that they're going to, at the very least, announce stiffer penalties for fights. They are calling it the fighting ban, but looking at the rules here, it seems that those engaged in the fight will be ejected from the game. The instigator or whoever is deemed to be the instigator will receive a 1-game suspension. In addition to a game misconduct, an automatic game suspension will be imposed starting with the player's second fight of the season. So I don't know that it's fair to really call it a fighting ban, as there does seem to be some rules around fighting. But perhaps this will deter fights and we'll start to see less of them. I think whether or not this is an actual fighting ban being imposed by the Q will be determined on how the officials react when a fight breaks out. Will they immediately step in to break it up, or are they going to stand back like they normally do, let the fight concur, and then just hand out a stiffer penalty?
Yeah, this is going to, we'll have to see how this plays out. The language that the Q has used is really strong. The QMJHL is planning to have a rule in place. This is a spokesperson. The Q spokesperson saying this is planning to have a rule in place that will ban fighting, making it black and white. That is no longer part of our game. That couldn't be spelled out more clearly. Whether the penalties will lead to that or not is the question. And when asked for the reason, the Q says, in order to prevent physical and psychological violence that could lead to minor or serious injuries or in extreme circumstances, death, the Q is responsible for establishing intervention rules when a fight occurs. That's really, really strong language to know where the league is coming from, where the government in Quebec is coming from. And we'll, as you said, we'll just have to see how that plays out, how it will be implemented, and whether these rules will have the full effect that's intended.
Yeah, and that's part of why when this started being discussed about, I mentioned that I was kind of interested to see how it would get played out and how this would end up affecting the game. Are we going to start seeing situations where there's a big hit and then that's followed by nothing? Are we going to start to see some bigger hits start to be penalized as well, or how they're going to go about that? Because as we talked about throughout this segment, fighting really has its roots within the game. So it is hard to imagine, especially if you spend your whole life watching the NHL, how hockey would go without those fights happening. So again, we're going to have to keep an eye on this to see how this plays out and whether or not it ends up being very effective.
Yeah, it's something that, folks compare the NHL to Europe and say, listen, there's no fighting in Europe. But again, that's part of the culture of their game. There wasn't fighting, so they didn't have to implement rules to take it out of the game. And that would be the case if those rules were applied to the NHL. It is... I think what's happening, the natural... it's naturally kind of disappearing from the game or being far less relevant, and to attach that to something that you thought was kind of irrelevant, like the salary cap, is fascinating to me, and that shows that the side effects, the what you'd think are unassociated effects of a rule change, of a major rule change. You have to think of all of the implications. is the fan base changing? Are there fans who will miss the entertainment value of fighting in the NHL? For sure. Has there been a negative effect on viewership because there's fighting in the game? Maybe with some of the newer fans who are being exposed in the newer markets. I think one of the things that's referenced is a study that came out a year ago at this time out of Columbia University. And it said that fighting in the league, the removal of fighting in the league increases attendance. And that was their conclusion. And when you read what they said, and they talk about fighting being extremely rare in Europe, and with the influx of more players from Europe, that makes that's maybe an effect of reducing fighting in the game, and that's possible, that's logical. But they talk about looking at the figures. We mentioned them earlier about the fight per game average being way down in the last 20 years, and then looking at the NHL's attendance going way up in the last 20 years, and saying, see, the reduction of fighting means there's more fans. I'm sorry, that's just silly. That's somebody that isn't being serious. I mean, this is a very serious university and researchers, but they obviously don't know anything about hockey and weren't willing to consider, the addition of expansion, the TV contract, all the things that contribute to hockey growing in attendance, and trying to tie that to the removal of fighting, I think, is just silly.
Yeah, absolutely. And fighting from an entertainment standpoint, I don't know that there's really anyone that can watch a hockey fight and not tell me that it's entertaining. Like, it is very entertaining. One of my most fond memories of watching hockey when I was a child was, and we had him on the podcast recently, but the Ray Emery versus Marty Biron fight. A bench brawl that ends with the goalie fight, and then Emery going on to fight another guy immediately after that. That's always stuck with me, and I think this is one of those occasions where I don't think anyone involved necessarily ended up being injured or faced any further impact beyond that one game. But you know what? There are also other things to consider here, and that we talked about the head injuries causing some problems, and honestly, at the end of the day, even though I find something entertaining, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good thing. And just because maybe someone else doesn't find it entertaining, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, or however that goes. There are just so many different angles to this, and quite frankly, as we keep saying, this isn't a black or white situation. It's within the culture. It's here, and we're going to have to wait and see how things play out going forward.
But we definitely want to hear from you on this. We know there's strong feelings on both sides. We know, some fans have their opinion has changed over the years, especially with the medical evidence that's coming out, and we just. I think, as you said, complicated issue. This is something that it doesn't require a simple answer. And what we're trying to do here is present all the different factors that have to be considered, and it makes it a very difficult issue to deal with, and something that is not going to just completely disappear by a rule, by the snap of a finger.
Absolutely. So we want to turn it over to our listeners. And as we head off into our final segment, I'll leave you with these questions. Our Canadiens Connection question of the week. Do you support a ban on fighting in junior hockey? And who was the best fighter you ever saw? We want to make sure we hear from you. And on that note, I think it's a good time to take our final break here. Stay with us. This is the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio.
It's summertime, and it means that, of course, it's music listening time, whether you are chilling at the beach or at the lake or at the cottage, even in your backyard, out for a walk or a jog, or driving and cruising with the windows down or the top down if you're lucky enough to have a convertible. It is summer music season. What have you got playing on your favorite summer playlist right now? I've been listening to a lot of classic rock, a lot of 70s and 80s. Even if you're not going on vacation, summer is all about that vacation state of mind. And so whether you want to listen to those favorite tunes on repeat or you just need to retreat inside your own head for a little bit, it's so much fun to create your own summer soundtrack. And I like to do that by popping in my Raycon wireless earbuds. There's just so much going on all summer, and sometimes you need some upbeat music to just pump you up before you go out and hit the beach with some friends or head over to a family barbecue, or maybe you want to relax a little bit with some calmer music, guided meditation. No matter what it is, if you're taking your earbuds on the go with you, maybe to the gym, like I said, out for a jog or a walk, or maybe you're just relaxing at home and you want some great tunes. I love to listen to music while I'm in the kitchen working, whether I'm cleaning or whether I'm cooking, baking, that kind of thing. So let me tell you, having your Raycon wireless earbuds is a great way to do that. They are the best way to listen to your music. You can use the earbud tap functions to toggle between 3 customizable sound profiles, noise isolation, and awareness mode, which allows some environmental sounds in so that you can still kind of hear what's going on around you if you want. Raycons have a 32-hour battery life, including 8 hours of playtime, so you can really listen to what you want, when you want, for a really long time. They come with custom gel tips for the most comfortable in-ear fit. That's a big one for me. In-ear earbuds and gel tips are typically difficult to fit inside my ear so that they fit and stay in my ear. Have not had an issue with my Raycons at all. And they start at just half the price of other premium audio brands, but they sound just as good, if not better. Raycons come with a 30-day happiness guarantee, so you really can't lose. So you can create your own soundtrack with Raycon. And right now, Canadiens Connection listeners can get 15% off their Raycon order at buyraycon.com/THPN. Really, this is an incentive just for listeners of the Canadiens Connection. We want you to take advantage of this offer. So again, that's buyraycon.com/THPN to save 15% on Raycons. buyraycon.com/THPN.
Welcome back to episode 256 of the Canadiens Connection podcast on Rocket Sports Radio. You can follow at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and check out the website canadiensconnection.com. Also, feel free to text us anytime via the Rocket Sports text line, 5853-ROCKET. That's 5853-ROCKET. And Rick, that was a very interesting discussion that we just had in that second segment. Lots of different angles to consider. And as you said, it's Enforcer Week at THN right now, and there's plenty of content in regard to that happening.
Yeah, head to thn.com/Montreal. You can see the article about the Montreal Canadiens and the best fighters to ever put on the CH jersey. And you can navigate from there if you're interested in another team and their list of fighters. Again, we had a very full discussion. Interestingly enough, we had a pretty full discussion before the show even started about this whole issue, and we could talk about it even more. I know that we're going to hear some opinions from all of our listeners, and send us a text, 5853-ROCKET. Send us an email, hello@rocketsportsmedia.com, or reach out to us on social media. We really want to hear from you on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, you can find all of our content at thn.com/Montreal throughout this busy off season. You're also going to want to head over to our YouTube channel. You can find that just by searching @AllHabs. And on there, weekly, you will find the Habs Hockey Report show hosted by Amy Johnson. The latest episode, entitled "Is Jeff Petry Really Back? Will a Habs goaltender get traded?" You'll want to tune into that to hear everything that she has to say about it. Amy is a great analyst, and she provides all sorts of interesting topics. And engage in the conversation too. Leave a comment, let her know what you think. Leave a like as well if you like what you saw, and hit that subscribe button so that you never miss a single episode. Because you're also going to find the Canadiens Connection podcast on YouTube right there as well. I believe we've been putting that one out on Tuesday. You'll see some amazing graphics put together by Amy Johnson along with the full episode. So if you like what you saw here today on this podcast, head over to YouTube, give it another listen, and if you just prefer listening to things on YouTube, that's another great way to find us. Also, make sure you subscribe to both of the Rocket Sports podcasts on your favorite podcasting app. First and foremost, the Press Zone that comes out every single Tuesday. You can find all the Press Zone episodes at thepresszone.fm, hosted by Amy Johnson and Patrick Williams. Sometimes you get Rick Stevens in there as well. That's going to be your inside source for everything AHL, Laval Rocket, Habs prospects, and you're going to want to find every single episode. If you miss some throughout the offseason, go back, take a listen. Highly recommended, and stay up to date with everything there. And this podcast, The Canadiens Connection, you can find all of our episodes at canadiensconnection.fm. If you missed any in the offseason, go back and check it out. We have some awesome interviews, one including Marty Biron. We did a whole thing on goaltenders throughout this summer, so make sure you go back, listen to all of our episodes, and continue to listen to us, because we're going to be here every single Saturday throughout this offseason. We don't take a break here at the Canadiens Connection. Also, for those who might be interested, Rocket Sports is recruiting. So if you're interested in joining the Rocket Sports team, Rick, what's the best way to do so?
Well, the best way is to reach out to us on social media. We've already had some of our listeners do just that, reach out to Rocket Sports at Rocket Sports on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, or if you prefer, head to habshockeyreport.com, habshockeyreport.com, and search there for the Join Our Team tab. We have a little questionnaire that will give us some information about you, and then we'll talk to you about the kinds of things we're looking for people to do, and talk about your skills. And we have a wonderful team, some of whom have been with me for a very long time. Last week, Michael, you talked to Brian, who manages our fantasy sports leagues, and he said he'd been with us for 13 years. This week, you sat down with Mike Raschel to talk about how he became a Habs fan, some of his memorabilia, and why he joined the Rocket Sports team.
Thanks, guys, and I would like to welcome Rocket Sports contributor Mike Raschel to the show. Mike, how are you doing today?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Not too bad. Nice to have another Mike in the studio with me. Keeps me a little bit of company. But today, what we're going to do, it's just a little get-to-know-you segment, get to know all of the lovely people behind Rocket Sports Media. And my first question for you is, how did you join Rocket Sports, and what exactly is it that you do for your contributions?
How did I join? Rick actually reached out to me. I won a draft contest that they held in 2019 for the Vancouver draft. So me and my good friend Shane went out for that, and met a lot of the team at the time, including Rick and Amy. And we had a great time, a great weekend out there, and really got to know everybody. And then Rick reached out about a week or two later and asked, he knew I'd listened to a lot of the podcasts over the years, so he was curious if I was interested in contributing, and it's something I'd never done before. I've been a hockey fan and a prospect fan all my life, and I've always enjoyed writing just for fun on the side. Never really done anything else with it though, so it's kind of neat to jump in and get a lot of coaching throughout and be able to write about something that I'm passionate about.
Yeah, what sort of stuff do you enjoy writing about the most?
Mostly prospects, honestly. I've been a junior hockey fan my entire life, and that's probably the majority of the hockey that I watch outside of all the Habs games. So it's mostly prospect related. Since I joined, I've tried to focus more on Canadian specific prospects, but I do across the board write about basically any game I see. I try to do a little bit of a write up on, whether it's Junior B, Junior A, OHL, World Juniors game, however low or high of a tier you want to look at it. If it's a game I enjoy and the player stands out to me, I'll do a little bit of research and just kind of put down my thoughts on paper. And yeah.
Okay, yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. You mentioned that for the most part you're a junior hockey fan, but you also do like the Habs. So did you grow up a Habs fan? How did you become a fan of the Habs in general?
I did, yeah. So we're originally from Switzerland, my family and I. So we moved here in 1998 when I was 10 years old. Well, I'd never seen a game of hockey before that. We were big soccer fans. That's the majority of what we watched. So as soon as I saw a game, I was very, very intrigued by it, kind of the physicality and honestly the creativity too. Soccer at that point had kind of become stale for me, to be quite honest. It's a game I still love to this day and still play to this day, but I think hockey's a lot more creative when you look at the speed and just all the different variations that you can do in that tight of a space with 5 players that are kind of on 5-on-5, obviously, instead of having a massive field and 12-on-12 and very structured. It's a lot quicker, and it just seemed like it was a lot more creative, and that's how I became a fan of hockey. And then pretty quickly, I became a fan of the Habs once my brother picked the local team, the Leafs. I obviously couldn't just follow the local team and needed a different team from what my brother was following. So I kind of did a little bit of research and figured out pretty quickly that the Habs were not only one of their biggest rivals, but were a much more successful team too when it comes to amount of Stanley Cups.
Well, it seems like you made the good decision. Your brother's decision seems a little bit questionable, but I guess just following up, going from a soccer fan to a hockey fan, how did you find that adjustment? I know a lot of people who are used to watching soccer have trouble adjusting to the speed of hockey. Was that an issue with you at all?
At first, I wasn't watching the game properly. That was definitely an issue because I watched the puck. So the first couple of years when I was younger, I was a big puck watcher. And after reading, a few hockey books and even a few coaching books, I'm very passionate about coaching as well in any aspect in life. I mean, it's kind of automatically gone towards sports, but even like in business or in personal aspects. So just through reading, I learned that really the last place you should be watching is where the puck is. The camera is automatically going to put you there. You should be much more interested in where the puck is going and how kind of the play is developing. So as soon as I flipped the switch to that, which is not easy to do if you're used to watching a ball or a puck all the time, as soon as kind of that switch happened in my head, it was a lot easier, not only a lot easier to follow, but a lot easier to understand why certain things were happening.
Oh yeah, that's pretty interesting. When you started watching, did you grow up with a particular favorite player?
Saku Koivu was one that I immediately went to. Obviously not very good Habs teams when I was watching, quite honestly. There was a lot of not necessarily rebuilds, but retools after retools before the salary cap came in. So it was a little difficult at times if you were just watching for success. But Koivu was one player that I really respected his not only his hard work, but kind of his leadership style as well. And he was never really the best player on any of those teams. He was never really the most offensive. He was just always there, always involved, it seemed like, and just seemed like a really good leader. And then when he went through the whole cancer scare too, that was really, really motivating for me as well when he came back. And I still remember that ovation to this day, that last game of the season there when he returned.
Yeah, great moment for sure. Just out of curiosity, where are you located on the map? And are there a lot of Habs fans around there? You mentioned your brother decided to be a Leafs fan. Or are you outnumbered by the Leafs fans where you are?
I'm definitely outnumbered, but I choose my friends wisely. So I'm located, it's a small farming community. It's called Hanover, Ontario. It's 2 hours north of Toronto, but for Habs fans, the easiest way to locate me will be in between the Guelph Storm and the Owen Sound Attack.
Nice.
Like almost directly in between, which coincidentally is where Nick Suzuki played his junior hockey for both of those teams.
Nice. Outside of Rocket Sports, you mentioned that you live in a farming community. So what is it that you do when you're not writing?
You probably could have guessed it. I'm an organic dairy farmer.
Yeah.
So we manage We manage just over 300 acres, my dad and I, and milk about 45 cows.
Nice. And I guess circling back to the Montreal Canadiens just a little bit, have you attended many Habs games throughout your lifetime? Were they in Montreal? Were they maybe close to Toronto or Ottawa? Whereabout were they?
Growing up, I saw a couple in Buffalo.
Oh.
My first Habs game in Montreal at the Bell Center was 3 years ago. I went with my wife over Christmas, and yeah, just what a phenomenal experience. Like, it was a game that honestly, even at the time, didn't really mean much. It was around Christmas time. There was a kind of a big lull going into it, a lot of injuries. You could kind of tell where the season was heading. And it was against the Colorado Avalanche, who were just coming off of a huge win over the Leafs. And you didn't have great feelings going into the game, but just being in Montreal, being around the Bell Center on a Saturday night, it was unbelievable. Like, you would have thought they were playing for the Stanley Cup that night from like the crowd reactions and the excitement going into it. It's hard not to get caught up in it.
Yeah, I've been to the Bell Center once for a game, and yeah, I agree. The atmosphere is absolutely insane, so I recommend to anybody to go and check that out at least once in their life, whether or not they are a Habs fan. But
go to Laval too. If you're going to make that trip,
true.
Also go to Laval and check out a Rocket game. It's a phenomenal experience.
Yeah, very underrated. I think a little bit more cost efficient too, if I'll be honest. But one last thing I'll ask before I let you go here, Mike, is do you have a favorite piece of Habs memorabilia, and what is it?
I have a 1993 Stanley Cup final puck. When it comes to value, honestly, I don't think it's worth anything. It's more, it's kind of like a good luck charm of mine that I carry around with me. It's something that I've had since I was 12 years old, I believe. I bought it at a flea market, so I don't even know like who had it before. It wasn't new. It's not in great condition or anything. It's not like in a glass or any kind of protective cover. It's just simply a 93 Stanley Cup and a 93 Stanley Cup puck. There we go. And it's something that I've had on even throughout my business travels, throughout any big meetings I've had. It's something I always had in my laptop bag. It's something I always have in my soccer bag. It's something I carry in my luggage if I'm traveling somewhere. It's that one piece that I never really leave home without. So I don't know if you want to call it a good luck charm or what, but it's just something I've always had on me, and I don't even think about it. It just happens.
That's pretty
So
awesome.
I'd say that's probably the most unique piece I have. Even though I'm looking at a whole room of memorabilia kind of around me, that's probably the one piece that means the most to me.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me today. Really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day, Mike. Thank you.
Mike's focus is on junior hockey, and that's he tends to write about prospects for us. So if you have a specific interest, or if you really don't know how you can help out, but you're passionate about the Canadiens and you have some talent you think you could contribute, then reach out to us and we'll see how we can fit you in.
Absolutely. And I think throughout the rest of the month of August, we will be sitting down with some of our other contributors. So you'll have an opportunity to get to know them and their stories. And if you like what you hear on there and you think, you know what, I'd like to be a part of this, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We would love to have a conversation with you. And now I think it's a good time to get to our Canadiens Connection question of the week. And we ask all of our listeners, do you support a ban on fighting in junior hockey? And who was the best fighter you ever saw? We want to make sure we hear from you. Please send us a text at 5853-ROCKET. And Rick, there are many ways for our listeners to reach out to us. In fact, throughout the weeks, we get all sorts of texts, tweets, emails, and whatnot, don't we?
We sure do. And sometimes it's tough to narrow them down as far as the ones we're going to read on air. But to read them on the air, what we really like is to have your first name and your location, where you're writing from. But please know that no matter whether we read them on the air or not, we'll get back to you. We like to interact with our listeners. This week, we had mostly questions or comments on Charlie Lindgren, and the 5 questions that we had with NHL goaltender Charlie Lindgren. That was Canadiens Connection episode 255. And why Charlie Lindgren? Well, he's a great person. He's just a good story in hockey, a member of the Canadiens for some years. He's got a great perspective on the Canadiens, on the league, on goaltending, and just on life. And that kind of fits in with Henry in Sioux Lookout, Ontario, who reached out via Facebook and said, quote, Carey, that's Carey Price, Carey will always be my favorite Habs goalie, but I really like Charlie. He likes hunting and fishing and seems like a normal guy. And for that, Henry, I can confirm Charlie is a down-to-earth, genuine guy, and just a wonderful hockey story, a wonderful hockey person, a wonderful hockey family.
We also received a text from Shane in Plattsburgh, New York. It's, of course, we have Habs fans from all over the globe that listen to us and like to chime in. What Shane had to say is, recently found your podcast, loved your work on the goaltending series. Great guests, Marty, Charlie, and the Scout. Count me as a happy Habs fan and a new sub. So thank you very much for the sub, Shane, and reaching out to let us know. We love the compliments, and that's a good way to get yourself read on air, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And our final message comes via email from James in North Hatley, Quebec. And Rick, what did he have to say?
He says in his email, are people getting carried away with the effect of the trade? This, of course, the trade that happened earlier in the week, not relating to our last podcast, but the trade that brought Jeff Petry back to Montreal. He goes on to say, James does, I wasn't expecting to see Pitlick or Hoffman in the lineup anyway. It will depend on what Hughes gets for Petry before I can say if this trade is a big win. And I think that's a fair point. People are talking about that it's opening up forward positions for the younger players. And that could be true. There was probably, prior to the trade, maybe 16 forwards that you might consider for those 12 spots. But was Rem Pitlick in that game, or was he always going to be put on waivers and sent to Laval? Was Hoffman going to be an every night player? Probably not, unless they were trying to showcase him. So I think, for me, the second round pick that the Canadiens got, not till 2025, but that's a valuable piece. Whatever they can get for Petry will add that to the mix and then call this a win. I think it is a win for Kent Hughes, but how big of a win I think is the issue that James is raising, and I'd have to agree with him there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we appreciate all the messages that we get throughout the week, and we look forward to continuing to reading other messages on future episodes as well. Coming up this week, for those in Montreal, Ricky Gervais is going to make an appearance at Place Belle. So if you're
nice.
In that area, you'll definitely want to head out to that. Comedian. That doesn't always happen at a big arena, and one of the original actors on the British version of The Office. So if you're a fan of that, it seems like a pretty awesome thing to head out to, doesn't it, Rick?
Nice little concert at Place Belle before the ice goes in.
And, of course, if you're keeping an eye on festivals, we have Il Sonic at Parc Jean Drapeau. That's an electronic music festival. So for those into that sort of thing, you'll find all sorts of great electronica artists. So on that note, that's going to be a wrap for us today. Thank you all for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the Canadiens Connection podcast on any of your favorite podcasting apps. Also, share on social media if you like what you heard. Enjoy your week, and we'll be back here next Saturday, August the 19th. And in fact, I'll be heading off on vacation for a couple weeks, so it's going to be Amy Johnson in the hosting chair, so make sure that you tune into that. Thank you all for listening to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio.
Click subscribe so you never miss an episode of Canadiens Connection. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Rocket Sports.